The Soviet Union was indisputably one of the great tanking nations. It has a history of highly influential and successful vehicles, dating from their latest tank, the T-14 Armata, all the way back to this, their first. But between this vehicle and some of the early successes you'll likely have heard of, like the T-26 or the BT series, were some disastrous designs. In this video, I'll take you on a very quick tour of Soviet interwar tank design, vehicles that were objectively dreadful, but that simultaneously were also an incredibly important part of Soviet tank design moving forward. During the Russian Civil War and the Russo-Polish War, the Red Army captured a number of Renault FTs, which they promptly copied as fast as they could. In 1920, the Soviet Union produced its first domestic tank, an FT copy named Freedom Fighter Comrade Lenin. 15 of these copies would be produced, with the series often referred to as the Russki Reno. Naturally, these engineers had never worked on tanks before, so the 15 vehicles were absolutely lousy with manufacturing defects and weren't all that useful. However, the Red Army had big plans, and in 1924 they formed the Tank Bureau. It was time to create their own tank design, the mighty T-16. T-16 wasn't a direct copy of the FT, but it definitely took a lot of aspects from the French design, and to be fair, it was an improvement. The Soviets had developed their own sprung suspension system, which made the T-16 faster than the FT, something the French themselves were doing with their Renault NC. The rest of the design was pretty much the same. Driver at the front, commander in a rotating turret behind him with a 37mm gun, and the engine at the rear. It wasn't awful, especially for a first try, but for 1926 it wasn't anything too spectacular. Unfortunately, the manufacturing and engineering behind the vehicle was still lacking, and the transmission was an absolute nightmare. It also couldn't cross a trench any wider than 1.5 meters, the poor thing. But the Soviets pressed on, in two quite different directions. One team worked on improving the T-16 design, while another began the T-17 project, turning the T-16 into a one-man tankette. The T-17 used the chassis of the earlier project, with a tankette superstructure sort of plonked on top. The idea was that these vehicles would support the tanks in the Soviets' new deep battle doctrine. In this image though, we can see something interesting. The vehicle is using a rubber band style track. The Soviets were very concerned with the large rate of track failures occurring on these vehicles, and decided to use T-17 to test a new type of single-piece rubber track, a method made popular in the USSR by French engineer Adolphe Caigres back in the 1910s. Delays in the T-17 meant it was barely ready for testing by 1930, tests which really only showed how obsolete a vehicle it really was. But the improved T-16 was still a thing, and it was actually quite good. The T-18 was still deep down a Renault FT, but it was a big improvement. It got new tracks, better suspension, another return roller, rubber tyres, and a huge engine and transmission overhaul overseen by Alexander Mikulin, the famous aircraft engine designer. It was a good, albeit odd design, with both having a ball-mounted machine gun and the 37mm gun on a sort of split turret face. T-18 would be accepted into service and would be the first tank to ever see mass production in the Soviet Union, with over 1,100 vehicles produced. More than 950 of these were an improved version with a larger engine, suspension tweaks, and a turret bustle. It's important to note here that although we are used to the insane production numbers of World War II, building 1,000 tanks was no joke in 1930, especially to the Soviet Union. In fact, the mass production of the T-18 marked a huge step forward in Soviet industrial capability, and while not a spectacular vehicle itself, the lasting effects of the vehicle really can't be overstated. But inescapably, the T-18 was, in essence, a First World War design, and it was struggling to keep up with its global competitors. But even as war loomed in 1938, a few hundred vehicles were upgraded with 45mm guns, and some actually saw combat as late as July 1941, thrown against the Germans in desperation during those first few months of Operation Barbarossa. T-19 was the last development of T-18 as a light tank, and saw it lengthened considerably in an attempt to make it more capable of crossing trenches without the aid of a tail. T-19 was a tank designed in the midst of changing specifications, and was meant to be fast, light, well-armoured, amphibious, well-armed, gas-proof, and easy to manufacture. Safe to say these requirements were never really met, and the vehicle never entered production. The Soviet Union was a nation of extreme censorship, bias, and indoctrination, something the sponsor of this video is trying to address. Ground News is an app and website that combines thousands of articles from all over the world into one location, where you can get the information without relying on biased, manipulative algorithms. So, for example, I follow the Ukraine topic, a polarizing subject that Ground News has published over 62,000 articles on in the last 3 months. Let's take this article about the first Abrams tanks being deployed by the Ukrainians. We can see that out of 44 sources covering this news, 22 of them lean right while only 4 lean left, so you might not have even seen it if you only use left-leaning news outlets. We can see how factual these articles are, if they're independent or not, and who broke the story first. Additionally, we can use the Ground AI feature to see how right-leaning and left-leaning outlets report the story differently. It's pretty cool. It's really helpful to have the ability to view current events without bias, or at least be aware of it when doing so, which is vital for me as I try to make videos with as little bias and personal opinion as possible. Use my link below to get a 30% discount on the amazing Vantage plan, giving you unlimited interests, unlimited stories, and unlimited access. It had been clear for years at this point that a larger, more capable design was going to be needed, so the Red Army attempted to create a medium tank using the basic design of the T-18. And they knew from the start that this is pretty much a practice run. They didn't want to undergo a huge new project until they had the tank designing and manufacturing experience to back it up. The 1930 budget then had funds for 30 of these new tanks, the T-12. T-12 was significantly larger than T-18, with a 200 horsepower engine and a 45mm gun. It had a big 8-sided turret, 3 DT machine guns, and a crew of 4. And it could cross a trench up to 2.65 meters wide. The prototype of the T-12 was built in record pace. It was built by unskilled workers using low quality materials and equipment, but it was built in record pace, and it was ready for testing in the autumn of 1929. These tests revealed that the poor quality of the vehicle left a lot to be desired, and an improved design was created, the T-24. Clearly they were aiming for it to be at least twice as good. T-24 looked very similar to the T-12, but saw a lot of improvements, not unlike the jump from T-16 to T-18. The hull was widened to overhang the tracks, the front was angled around the driver, the domed tracks were flattened out, the 8-sided turret was replaced with a round one, and the rear of the tank was lengthened due to changes to the engine, transmission, and exhaust. But the T-24 was entering that strange, sluggish, pre-war medium zone and weighed nearly 20 tons, while only having 25mm of armour at its thickest part. And, considering these tanks were meant to be incredibly mobile to fit into Soviet doctrine, its 15 miles per hour top speed wasn't very encouraging. In 1931, the T-24 prototype was sent to Kubinka to be tested against the T-12. Somehow, despite the T-24's engine catching fire almost immediately, the performance was found to be satisfactory, and 24 tanks were ordered. The 45mm guns weren't ready yet, so many photos of T-24 will show it with no main armament, with them finally receiving guns in 1932. Despite this being sort of just a design exercise in an attempt to hone their skills, the Red Army was planning to order 300 T-24s, but in the end only 24 complete vehicles were ever produced. It was unreliable, under-armoured, and underpowered. Strangely, these vehicles so far have all been quite sensible. This is about to change. Meet TG-1. After the Soviet Union heard news of the massive French Char 2C, they wanted a large, silly tank of their own, and recruited German tank designer Edward Grote to the cause in 1930. In just over a year, he had created the first prototype of the TG series, and this thing was a monster for 1931. The TG-1 mounted a 76mm main gun in one turret, and another 37mm gun in a turret above, with the ball-mounted machine guns dotted all over the sides of the vehicle. Grote decided that the vehicle should be powered by an engine of his own design, an engine which he could not get to work reliably. The decision was made to replace this with an M6 aircraft engine, but this proved too large to fit into the Grote engine size slot in the rear, so the whole thing was delayed. The TG-1 was an advanced vehicle for the time. Fully welded construction, a rudimentary autoloader, a pneumatically driven transmission, and a modern suspension system. And it was actually quite good. Sure, they'd accidentally welded the turret in place, the gun arrangement was a bit difficult ergonomically, and it struggled a bit on softer ground, but it was fast, well armed, and well armoured. An optimist may have called it 10 years ahead of its time, but it was also about 10 years ahead of Soviet manufacturing capabilities, and it was insanely complex, almost impossible to mass produce. And even if they'd managed it, it was ludicrously expensive. For the price of one TG1, the Red Army could produce 25 of the new BT series of fast tanks. No surprise then that the TG1 was cancelled, with a single prototype being scrapped at some point during the war. Grote would go on to create more mental 1,000-ton tank designs for the Germans after the TG1 was cancelled, while other members of that team would go on to work on vehicles like the T-28 and T-35. But the real killer for vehicles like the T-19, T-24 and TG1 were the BT-1 and the T-26, two extremely cheap, extremely capable vehicles adapted from foreign designs. And importantly, they were simple enough to make tens of thousands of them. That being said, there's no way Soviet engineers could have had the know-how required to mass produce these vehicles without first working on these bizarre interwar warriors. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It helps grow the channel and it's absolutely free. I promise not to be annoying. Thank you again to my patrons. I hope you enjoyed hearing about these weird little tanks. I'll see you all in the next one.